So the idea of India is of one land embracing many. It's the idea that Indians can endure differences of caste, creed, color, culture, cuisine, conviction, custom and costume, and still rally around a consensus. And that democratic consensus around the simple principle that in a large, diverse democracy like ours, you don't really need to agree all the time, except on the ground rules of how you will disagree. Acceptance of difference, rather than mere tolerance, has been the great Indian secret. And that has been the strength of Indian soft power. We've always managed to maintain consensus on how to manage without consensus. As I've said before, India isn't a melting pot like America, it's a thali, a collection of dishes on a platter. Each dish tastes different. It's in its own bowl, so it doesn't necessarily flow into the next, but they all belong together on the same plate, and they complement each other in making the meal a satisfying repast. That's what India is all about. Water? There's somebody else's water here. I don't mind one of my own. Sorry. No, that's not mine. That's somebody's left over here. So, since I mentioned the thali, let me say that cuisine is an area of soft power influence. The French have long known that the way to someone's heart is through his palate. The late British Foreign Secretary Robin Cook once said that Britain's national dish was no longer fish and chips, it was chicken tikka masala. UK curry houses today employ more people than the coal mining, shipbuilding, and iron and steel industries combined. So the empire can strike back. But India's soft power is not just what is represented by the allure of biryani, Bollywood, and Bhangra, the kinds of things I did speak about at that TED conference 8 years ago. Rather, even more important are the values and principles for which India stands. After all, Mahatma Gandhi won India its independence through the use of soft power, because non-violence and satyagraha were indeed classic uses of soft power and moral force before those terms were even coined. India's first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, was also a skilled exponent of soft power. He developed a role for India in the world based entirely on its civilizational history and moral standing, making India the voice of the oppressed and the marginalized against the big power hegemons of the day. This gave the country enormous standing and prestige across the world and strengthened our own self-respect as we stood, proud and independent, on the world stage. But of course, soft power comes with its own set of limitations, as Nehru himself was unfortunate enough to have witnessed during his time. The greatest flaw in Nehru's approach was that his soft power was unrelated to the acquisition of hard power. As the humiliation of the military defeat by China in 1962 demonstrated, soft power has crippling limitations in national security terms. Because instead of Theodore Roosevelt's famous maxim, speak softly and carry a big stick, Nehru's India spoke loudly but carried no stick at all. In a tough neighborhood, the rhetoric of peace can only take you so far. Soft power becomes credible when there is hard power behind it. That's why the US has been able to make so much of its soft power. Recent Indian history offers a somewhat mixed picture when it comes to the effective use of hard power. Within our own subcontinent, India is often caught in a cleft stick on such matters. It often treads softly in its anxiety not to come across as an Asian bully. And in so doing, it emboldens those who are prepared to test it. As a result, it has been noticeably reluctant to evolve a strategic doctrine based on hard power. There is a sense in which most Indians still think that would be unseemly. This is also sometimes perceived to be the case by foreigners, which may help explain the recent Chinese probe into the Doklam Plateau in Bhutan. Fortunately, India's swift and effective response, coupled with skillful diplomacy, resolved that episode. Now, of course, New Delhi knows that its soft power cannot solve its security challenges. After all, an Islamist terrorist who enjoys a Bollywood movie will still have no compunction about setting off a bomb in a Delhi market. We've known that to happen. The US already learned that the perpetrators of 9/11 ate their last dinner at a McDonald's. To counter the threat of terrorism, there is no substitute for hard power. But India knows that soft power lasts longer and has a wider, more self-reinforcing reach. For China and Russia, Kung Fu movies or the Bolshoi Ballet will win more admirers internationally than the People's Liberation Army or Siberian oil reserves, even if, in each case, it is what the state relies on. The latter is what the state relies on. Hard power without soft power stirs up resentments and enmities. Soft power without hard power is a confession of weakness. We need both, what Hillary Clinton, no longer quoted much, dubbed smart power. Yet hard power tends to work better domestically rather than internationally. An autocratic state is not concerned about having a soft power narrative for its own people, but without one, it has little with which to acquire the goodwill of the rest of the world. Whether it's the Chinese in Tibet or the Russians in Ukraine, it can be said that in each case, a major military power won the hard power battle, but lost the soft power war. Where soft power works in security terms is in attracting enough goodwill from ordinary people around the world to reduce the sources of support and succor that the terrorists enjoy, and without which they cannot function. Now, India's soft power has held up well in today's globalizing world. Globalization has both sparked and allayed many Indians' fears that economic liberalization will bring with it cultural imperialism of a particularly insidious kind, that Game of Thrones and burgers will supplant Garba and Bhelpuri, But instead, India's experience with Western consumer products has demonstrated convincingly that we can drink Coca-Cola without becoming Coca-colonized. Indians will not become any less Indian if, in Mahatma Gandhi's famous metaphor from more than 70 years ago, we open the doors and windows of our country and let foreign winds blow through our house. Because Indians are strong enough not to be blown off our feet by these winds. Our popular culture has proved resilient enough to compete successfully with MTV and McDonald's. Besides, the strength of Indianness lies in many ways in its ability to absorb foreign influences and to transform them by peculiarly Indian alchemy into something that belongs naturally on the soil of India. Like McDonald's selling McTikki burgers now. That's how we transform global products. But indeed, from the export of Bollywood to Bhangra, India has demonstrated that it's a player in globalization, not merely a subject of it. India benefits from the future and the past, from the international appeal of its traditional practices, from Ayurveda to yoga, both accelerating in popularity across the globe, and the transformed image of the country created by its thriving diaspora, the in-diaspora that is sitting here, so well represented here. Now, though recent years have witnessed India's growing consciousness of its soft power, we still lack the more systematic development of a soft power strategy. So far, such strategic advantages that have accrued from India's soft power, goodwill for our country amongst African, Arab, and Afghan publics, for instance, has been a largely unplanned byproduct of the normal emanations of Indian culture. The popularity of Indian movies and TV shows in these parts of the world, for instance. Such goodwill has not been systematically harnessed as a strategic asset by New Delhi. It's ironic that in and around the 2008 Beijing Olympics, authoritarian China showed a greater determination to use its hard power strengths to cultivate a soft power strategy for itself on the world stage. India will not need to try as hard, but will need to do more than it currently does to leverage its natural soft power into a valuable instrument of its global strategy.